So we'd like to welcome you once again. So this is going to be, we're going to have a constellation of experts in water affairs and military affairs, in addition to a number of experts. This is going to be the second session that is going to discuss the different conventions and agreements that regulate the use of the Nile, and also the different relevant agencies that are in charge of the implementation of these conventions and agreements. So we have from Khartoum, Dr. Ahmed El Mufti, and from Addis Ababa, we're going to have Mr. Abd Shakur Abd Samad from Ethiopia. So we'd like to welcome our guests. Before we start with the discussion, we would like to listen to this statement made by Sameh Shukri, who reiterated the will of his country to start with the negotiation-based solution and also criticized the intransigence of Ethiopia. So Egypt has been trying for 10 years in order to underline the joint property of the Nile, and also Egypt and Sudan have made so many concessions to show flexibility and also to give the opportunity to our brothers in Ethiopia in order to reinforce their livelihood, to generate electricity due to the impact on development in those countries, but we have not seen a political will from the part of the Ethiopians to sign this agreement that was drafted in Washington, and the Ethiopian negotiator accepted all the items of the agreement and then after that stopped or didn't want to sign. So also we have had an African Union pathway in keeping with the Security Council, and despite the efforts that have been exerted by the President of South Africa, these are appreciated efforts. Also, we have the efforts by Tshisekedi, the President of Democratic Congo, and the talks that have taken place in Kinshasa, but the negotiations have come to a stall because the Ethiopians did not want to continue with the negotiations. So the objective of these negotiations is to reach an agreement with regard to the filling of the Renaissance Dam. So this shows the fact that the Ethiopians are being intransigent and do not want to continue with the different political pathways that we would like to have. Did not take into account the repercussions if this situation continues, if the escalation continues, and this would have a large negative impact on security and stability in the Horn of Africa, in East Africa, and this would lead to so many problems that would impact the African continent at large. So after the statement that was made by Sameh Shukri, I would like to move to my dear guests in this program, in this session, and I would like to say that each speaker will have 5 minutes. So we'd like to start our discussion with Dr. Badr Shafi'i, the Egyptian academic. So the Egyptian civilization was established on the borders of the Nile River. So there haven't been any objections from the upstream countries. So what are the legal bases that are used by Egypt, and why does Egypt want to have a binding agreement with regard to the filling of the dam? The principles agreement, wasn't it enough to guarantee the rights of Egypt? In the name of God, the most compassionate, the most merciful, I would like to thank the Jazeera Centre for Studies for the opportunity. I would like to thank Mr. Mustafa and the dear guests. First of all, I would like to clarify the legal basis based on which Egypt presents its argument with regard to the Nahda Dam, which is established in the Blue Nile passageway. So the legal bases used by Egypt are the agreements and conventions that have been signed. And here I particularly mention the 1902 that had been signed between Ethiopia and the British government. This agreement was a political agreement in order to demarcate borders between Ethiopia and Sudan. So the line is cutting, unfortunately. So this is a border agreement, and this is very important indeed because it sets the current border that we have until now. So Ethiopia was keen to keep those borders, and this is a very important point. So Ethiopia took Beni Shankun from Sudan. So it was given by Britain to Mimlik II for Britain to get the right to extract gold. So Mimlik II, in the third item of the agreement, pledged that no water projects are going to be established in those areas. In the Tala Valley, no projects that would obstruct the flow of water into Egypt unless this is going to be established in agreement between Ethiopia and Egypt. So we're talking about a demarcation, a border agreement that gives Egypt the right to the water of the Nile and also not to obstruct the passageway of the Nile waters into Egypt. So this was the agreement that was concluded at the time. So this shows that Ethiopia is not respecting the agreement that had been concluded. So if Ethiopia does that, Sudan can retrieve or call for Beni Shankul that was taken from Sudan and given to Ethiopia. And the second point that I would like to talk about, this agreement also was used by Ethiopia, was also recognized by Ethiopia. Unfortunately, the line is cutting when it comes to the demarcation of borders in 1972. And also, this was used to justify the annexation of a region in Somal, and it was also used against Eritrea when it refused to give it the Triangle of Bedni, and we remember the war that was between the two countries. So this is the agreement that is used by both Egypt and Ethiopia. So Ethiopia willingly signed this agreement. So this has given the right to Egypt to use these waters and that there should not be any obstruction or objections to that. So in Article 11 and 12, that was concluded that the new independent countries, such as Ethiopia in this case, would respect previous agreements that have been concluded. So this was the principle. So these are the Ethiopian practices, and this is the position that we have now. Sorry to interrupt you, Dr. Bedr, but Ethiopia does not recognize the 1959 agreement, and there was a guest from Sudan that said that this is an unjust agreement. He said that the agreement did not cover Ethiopia in 1959. As I told you in my intervention, the 1959 agreement was based on that particular accord or agreement that was concluded. So this agreement was between Lord Lloyd and the Prime Minister of Egypt at the time. So Britain was a common country between the two agreements. So, and this reflected the historical and natural rights of Egypt vis-à-vis these waters, and the agreement also talked about the share of Egypt, which is 48 billion cubic meter. So, Dr. Badr, so it seems that there is a problem with your connection. So you have finished your 5 minutes that have been allocated to you. I will come back to you in order to continue with your discussion. But give me the opportunity to move to Dr. Ahmed Al Mufti. So in the agreement that was signed between Britain and Ethiopia in 1902, so the occupying country has conceded the territories of Bini Shangun on the condition that Ethiopia would not establish any dams that would obstruct the flow of water. So, what are the legal basis in the objections of Sudan on the Renaissance Dam, saying that the Nile River is a trans-border river? So what are your comments, sir? So the 1902 agreement is a very important foundation that is recognized by international law. So the first reason is that we have relied on Article 4 in order to retrieve Gambela region, because Article 4 gives the Ethiopian region, put it under the sovereignty of Sudan until the independence of Sudan. And then Ethiopia used and resorted Article number 4. So this is we use article number 3, which is to do with the Shangol region, that they should not build anything on the Nile river passageway. So this is a binding agreement. So Ethiopia is asking for the borders of Fajaga based on the agreement number 1 of the same agreement. So there are no borders between Ethiopia and Sudan unless it is based on the 1902, other than the 1902 agreement. And article number 3 of the agreement of 1997, so this is about the UN passageway for non-navigation purposes. So there are references to the use of water as per international law. So Ethiopia is directly bound to use these agreements and as per the UN agreement. So the 1959 agreement, although it is an agreement between Egypt and Sudan, and Ethiopia is not party to it, but it binds Ethiopia because it says that all prior agreements should be recognized. So I say also that there is another agreement with 1891, and there have been some floods, and also there is 1991. There is another agreement which is to do with Adbar River. In addition, we have the Declaration of Principles of 2015 that limits the freedom of Ethiopia when it comes to filling the dam, particularly to start any filling unless there is an agreement on operational principles. And Ethiopia has signed the 2015 agreement, but Ethiopia violated this agreement and took legitimacy to carry out the second filling, but it violated the Declaration of Principles. In addition to that, there is what was agreed on the Antibly agreement that has not entered into force, but what is agreed on supports the position of Egypt and Sudan. Dr. Ahmed Al-Mufti, sorry to interrupt you. You said that what is agreed on Antibly agreement supports Sudan and Egypt, but we had a guest in the previous session from Ethiopia who said that we have to go back to Antibly agreement because it guarantees the rights of Ethiopia. Can you clarify what you have just said, please? We have entered into direct negotiations when it comes to Antibly agreement between 1995 and 2012, and I attended all the meetings that have been conducted, and we have reached in excess of 90% of the things that have been discussed, but we realized during that period the first country that signed, we realized that Ethiopia was in the process of implementing its project. It was negotiating with the countries of the Nile Basin, and it was also solely working on the establishment of the dam, took advantage of the circumstances that were running in both countries, Sudan and Egypt, and it started with a parallel pathway far away from the Antibly agreement, and article number 3 talks about water security, and this was not included in the declaration, and this shows that Ethiopia has violated the Antibly Agreement, and if it wants to go back to it, both Sudan and Egypt are going to accept that, but Ethiopia is talking about that's over Antibly. If they want to go back to the Antibly Agreement, they have to stop the second filling until there is a consensus about Antibly Agreement. Dr. Muhammad Al-Mufti talks about 1959 agreement. The Ethiopian side declines that, and they say that the Egyptian and Sudanese countries have shared water, and Ethiopia is asking for its share, and it wants to be party to this agreement and have the right to share water resources. What is your comment on this agreement? So the demands made by Ethiopia are not right because Sudan and Egypt have not bound Ethiopia. So Ethiopia dispensed itself with the use of these water and did that individually, and they have left such waters flow to Sudan and to Egypt. So what is the reasonable situation? So Ethiopia has let it flow towards the Sudanese borders. So the sharing of the Nile water in the absence of Ethiopia, was not the case. This water that was shared is the one that flew from Ethiopia. It was not in Sudan nor in Egypt. That is why, reasonably speaking and legally speaking, the 1959 agreement says that any country of the basin, they want to take a share. So the Sudan and Egypt, they should decide upon the share, and they would have the right to take a share. In my opinion, what Ethiopia is talking about sharing the Nile River water, and these are waters that have led to by Ethiopia to flow. So I talk about Article number 3 that was discussed by the 1997 agreement, and this was discussed for 5 months, and I was the representative of Sudan at the time. The whole international community agreed on these agreements, and the ICJ has issued a clear verdict that the 1997 agreement that was not signed by Ethiopia, was not approved by Ethiopia, but Sudan was amongst the countries that voted for this agreement because it was a clear kind of agreement, and I was in the General Assembly, UN General Assembly. I voted for it, and this has become a law that recognizes the 1959 agreement. And in my opinion, Egypt and Sudan do not deny the right of Ethiopia for it to benefit from its share, but without impacting the other shares, because these are gained rights and part of an international law. Talking about international conventions and agreements, you talked about the 1997 agreement, the UN agreement, and there are some terms that are being used from time to time. Some talk about the fair use, some others talk about the just and fair use, some talk about sovereignty over Nile, some talk about water justice. Can you please clarify the most important terminologies that are used and how this implementation is carried out over the Nile River? So there have been a number of terms that are constant. So there is no justice when it comes to water. So when we talk about a fair and reasonable use, there is no such thing as a justice when it comes to water. So we're talking about fairness. And this was the principle that was underlined by the 1997 agreement. Any talks about justice, this is outside the framework of international law. So we're talking here about shares. Shares, this is something that is historical. It has ended. We're talking about the 1997. It doesn't talk about shares. It talks about utilization. It does not talk about shares. It talks about utilization that should be reasonable and fair. So there is a great deal of change. And the 1997 was studied since the 50s of the 20th century, and it was presented to the United Nations in 1994. It was a set of conventions and articles. It was studied by different experts from different parts of the world. So when they talk about shares, this is outside the scope of international law because it does not talk about shares. It talks about a fair and reasonable utilization. And after that, the Entebbe Agreement came to talk about the same thing. It doesn't talk about shares. It talks about reasonable and fair resources and the sharing of gains and not water. So all these principles are very important. They were approved by Sudan and Ethiopia. And there is a solution if it is committed to. But talking about the 1959, that it is not just, I do not think that is a legal discussion. I talk about the legal framework. Is it in the interest of both Sudan and Egypt by 100%? And Ethiopia does not have any legal basis with regard to that. Dr. Ahmed Al-Mufti. Perhaps my two guests have an internet problem, so we're going to continue posing the same questions. So Sudan played a role in mediation between the two countries. So talking about the framework agreement or the declaration of principles, so how can we describe this declaration of principles? Is it going to be in the interest of Egypt, of Ethiopia? Is it a recognition of shares? It is a recognition of the right to have projects established in those areas. So the declaration was discussed, but despite all that, it was Ethiopia that took the initiative and violated this declaration. So this violation was very clear in the first filling of the dam. So the Security Council and the African Union said that they should not carry out the first filling until they reach the principles. So that is why I say that the dam, Nahda Dam, and all what has happened, all this is not legitimate. So the legitimacy is only through the declaration of principles. So that is why Egypt and Sudan should withdraw their signature of this declaration, and they have to raise the ceiling of this declaration. So this is the right thing that should be carried out. So the declaration was in the interest of Ethiopia and not Egypt and Sudan, but it wants to get full sovereignty over the Nile water, and these are waters that are recognized internationally. These are joint resources of water, and that should be used by consensus between the three countries. So these two countries should withdraw their signature because this is a topical issue, and it should be carried out until the different things that are being carried out vis-a-vis the Renaissance Dam should stop. So please stay with us, Dr. Ahmed Al-Mufti. We have from Ethiopia, Mohammed Al-Arousi. I would like to welcome you, and I would like to apologize to our guests, Dr. Abdel Sabur. His internet was interrupted. And Mr. Al-Arousi, the discussion that has taken place between negotiation and a confrontation. So talking about the legal framework, the agreements, the historical conventions. With regard to these agreements, I was talking to Mr. Badr Al-Shafi'i, an academic from Egypt, about these agreements. Also, I talked a while ago to Dr. Al-Mufti. I talked about also these agreements. So I would like to listen to your comment on these legal conventions and agreements, particularly the frameworks that regulate relations in the Nile basin. So there were references to 1902, 1905, 1959, and 1993 between Egypt and Ethiopia, and also the declaration of principles between Egypt, Sudan, and Ethiopia. Can you please comment on these agreements? Thank you very much. I would like to salute you and salute your dear guests. So I would like to start with the declaration agreements, and I have listened to Dr. Al-Mufti, and that he said that this is a point of legitimacy for Ethiopia. Yes, he is a legal expert, and I respect that. But at the same time, we would like to say the legitimacy based on which the principle had been established. So this agreement was established in order to have other parties to reinforce the goodwill of the parts of the Ethiopians in order to alleviate the concerns that our brothers in Egypt had. So the building of the dam is an Ethiopian right as long as it does not harm the interests of other countries. So if there are concerns, such agreements would be concluded. So what was the reason behind having such agreements? So the reason why it was rejected is the fact that these agreements were unclear. They did not detail so many things. So there are some who say that these agreements should be binding and should be implemented, and Ethiopia should implement these agreements. But the majority of legal experts say that these are not binding to Ethiopia. Mr. Muhammad Larousi. So since these points that you have mentioned, and I have summarized the points that have been mentioned by the other speaker, so how can we explain that these agreements should not be recognized, knowing that these agreements are international agreements? And my two guests talked about these agreements, and one of the agreements entailed that Beni Shingul should be given to Ethiopia by Britain, that was ruling Egypt and Sudan. It was given to King Milik II. It was the same agreement based on which Ethiopia had demarcated its borders with the neighboring countries. I am not a legal expert, but I would like to talk about one simple point. So, had this agreement been binding to Ethiopia and was useful to Sudan, Sudan would not have halted its efforts. Sudan then would have resorted and referred the case to international courts since the beginning of the process of Ethiopia's building of the Renaissance Dam. So all the agreements that have been concluded during the colonial time are not recognized by international courts unless these agreements have to do with borders. Because these are very intricate matters. So these agreements are not recognized by Ethiopia because these are colonial kind of agreements. So had Ethiopia recognized these agreements, so these agreements have been drafted by the occupying force, Britain. They were not drafted by Sudan or Egypt. So it was the occupier. So it was Britain. Mr. Mohammed Al Arousi, I would like to clarify to you the 1902 agreement was between King Milik II and Ethiopia was not occupied, and Sudan and Egypt were occupied. So can you respond to that? And after that, you talk about the legal basis of the rights that Ethiopia is underlining. So, what are the legal basis that Ethiopia is using in order to defend its right to the Renaissance Dam? So, Ethiopia does not consider the Nile as an international river. So, these agreements, when I tell you that they're not binding to Ethiopia and the demands that are made to Ethiopia based on the fact that this agreement was a colonial agreement. So, the line is not very clear, unfortunately. So these agreements have to be referred to the UN committee, should be recognized by the UN committee. Why these agreements have not been resorted to? These are not resorted to, are not recognized because these are colonial agreements. And I do not think that it is reasonable to resort to those agreements. Ethiopia is accused of wanting to make the Nile River a sole property. We have the irrigation and water ministers, all of them say that the river is a joint river by the three countries. So Ethiopia is an upstream country, and all what Ethiopia had done is to benefit from these waters that start from its territories without impacting the other countries. So So they say that Ethiopia wants to make the Nile River an exclusive Nile, used exclusively by itself. But we have the Sudan and Cairo benefiting. They have been benefiting from decades, and they have used these shares. And Ethiopia have never talked about that. Ethiopia had never talked about these waters that have been used and have not been benefited from by Ethiopia. And despite all that, there are those who accuse Ethiopia, saying that Ethiopia wants to exclusively use the Nile without giving access to it to other countries. So we have to understand that there are historical rights for Ethiopia, and this should be something that is clear when it comes to spectators. So there are so many pieces of information that are wrong. So many say that Ethiopia wants to obstruct and cut water resources for them not to reach Egypt and Sudan. I would like to go to Dr. Badr Shafei, the Egyptian academic. He is back to us. Dr. Badr, we're going to talk about negotiations, but if you have any comments about what our guest had said in less than a minute, you have 5 minutes. What is the assessment of Egypt when it comes to the negotiation rounds? So why has Egypt asked for the intervention of the Security Council? Can it intervene in such a matter? And what are the limits when it comes to such kind of intervention? And why doesn't Ethiopia want intervention of international agencies? So there is a difficulty here in our guest, I'm afraid. We cannot hear the guest, I'm afraid. So we're facing difficulties, I'm afraid. The sound is not very clear. So there are some difficulties with regard to sound. I think there are problems with the internet connection. We do apologize to the ladies and gentlemen listening to the translation. We're facing some difficulties with sound. We do apologize to the ladies and gentlemen listening to the translation. We're finding it difficult to hear the intervention of our guest. Dr. Badr, there is a connection problem, Dr. Badr. So I'm going to come back to you, and I hope that you would be able to use the headsets. It would be much better for us to have a clearer sound. So I'm going to come back to you. I'm going to give the floor to Dr. Ahmed Al-Mufti. Dr. Ahmed Al-Mufti, let's discuss what Mr. Muhammad Al-Arousi had said. You are an international law professor. The guest said that international law does not recognize these agreements because these were established and concluded during a colonial period. And also, the guest said that Ethiopia has not called for the waters that have flown to both Sudan and Egypt in keeping with the Sudanese loan. So the legitimacy is from Ethiopia itself and does not have to lean on the 2015 agreement. I would like to salute Mr. Al-Arousi. He is not a legal expert. That is why he did not respond to 2 points, which is the binding nature of the agreement 1902. So Gambela, Ethiopia leaned on article number 4. So this shows that Ethiopia recognizes the 1902 agreement and also the land based on which the dam was given to Ethiopia based on article number 3. So they take the land but do not accept the conditions based on which the land was given to Ethiopia. The second thing that I would like to talk about, Ethiopia, with regard to the 1959 agreement, the justification they have used is that these are Nile water that have been usurped by Sudan and Egypt. And they have not responded. So they have not responded to this point. So why has Ethiopia let the flow of such water through the Sudanese borders? So they did not want to have these resources. So that is why, logically speaking, Sudan and Egypt would definitely use them. So what has let such water flow in 1959? And also, you mentioned Article number 5 of the agreement, the United Nations, which was recognized by the ICJ. And they said that prior agreements would remain the basis of legal rights. So he did not respond to these points. That is why in the principles declaration, they were given the right to fill, but with conditions. They have carried out the first filling without respecting the conditions. But saying that Sudan did not abide by this agreement, I was a member of the delegation and we wanted to implement it. But the government complimenting Ethiopia, they did not want to mention that. And Sudan had never asked Egypt to pay for the water loan. No, they never did that. So in less than 30 seconds for me to go back to Badr al-Shafi'i, who is back now, Mr. Muhammad Al-Arousi said, if the 1902 agreement is a legal agreement and it is the right of Sudan and Misr, Sudan and Egypt to use it. So why haven't they used it? I responded to this question because there was a discussion and I was part of the discussion and I thought that they should not have entered into any negotiation until this matter is decided upon. But the Sudanese government, they wanted to complement Ethiopia because it had established the building block for the establishment of this dam. Saidu could have gone ahead with the agreement. So this was, but Ethiopia backstabbed Sudan. They should have appreciated the step taken by Sudan, but they didn't. I would like to go back to Dr. Badr Shafi'i, and we're still talking about negotiations. So why Ethiopia wants the intervention only of the African Union and does not want the intervention of other institutions. Ethiopia, in the declaration agreements, had some problematics with regard to item number 10. When you ask a mediation, you have to have the approval of the three parties. So this was the problematic. So she wanted the negotiation to be a tripartite to save time. And if there is any mediation, and it did not want that because, as we have said, because it has put preconditions during the negotiations saying that any phases would not implement the building of the dam. And even if the negotiations or the legal studies reach things that are in disparity with the building of the dam, Ethiopia would not stop the building, and this is going to lead to a status quo. So this has led Egypt to look for alternatives within the standpoint of negotiations because the 2 points are not accepted by Egypt. So international arbitration and the negotiations have failed between the three countries, and Ethiopia wasted time and also has put conditions and made the outcomes non-binding. And when Egypt found that Ethiopia continued building, it had to look for other alternatives. And amongst the alternatives that were sought is resorting to the Security Council. And this happened in September after 8 years of negotiations, negotiations within a vicious circle. So the Security Council is the one that is concerned with regard to anything that has to do with the violation of peace and security. And in keeping with item number 6, it can carry out mediation or it can carry out efforts through a third party. They can do so many things as part of peaceful methodologies or the use of Chapter 7. But the problematic in the Security Council lies in the description of the situation. When Egypt resorted to the Security Council last year, particularly after Ethiopia refused to sign the Washington Declaration that was signed by Egypt, the Security Council, unfortunately, and because there are some countries that have some interest with Ethiopia and do not want to internationalize the crisis, such as China, that exports pieces of equipment, and Russia did not want the Security Council to take a binding decision in this regard. And as a result of that, the Security Council has referred the case to the African Union in keeping with the UN Charter that gives the Council the right to do so. And we know that the African Union and Ethiopia was heading, South Africa was heading the African Union, and the African Union, South Africa is supportive of Ethiopia, as we know. So Ethiopia defied the first summit in 2020, and it said that it was going to start with the first filling of the dam. And after the second summit, Ethiopia started with the filling. So this is a clear challenge to the African Union, and this has led Sudan to have the quartet that includes the African Union, the European Union, and the United States of America in order to attempt to reach an agreement that would be binding, because Ethiopia was not bound by the principles. It is stalling and this what has led Egypt to internationalize the problem. And Sudan has resorted to this matter as well. As we know, we have international interests that do not want to escalate the situation. And Ethiopia also did not want wanted to do that because it didn't want to have any other alternative but the African Union to intervene in that. So please stay with us, Dr. Badr al-Shafi'i. I would like to move now to Mr. Mohammed Al-Arousi, the Ethiopian political analyst. Mr. Mohammed Al-Arousi, we talk about the phases of negotiation between the three countries after the Renaissance Dam. What is the assessment of Ethiopia with regard to these rounds of negotiations? So what is your assessment of this negotiation throughout these years, and what are the reasons behind such disparities and disagreements? that impede the agreement of a conventional agreement between the three countries. My personal assessment and not my official governmental assessment, because this would be perhaps expressed by other persons. As an observer, I would like to say that these negotiations and other negotiations that were the reason behind what has happened. We have seen that these negotiations were the ones that led to more intricacies in the scene. How I said that Egypt and Sudan come to the negotiations, particularly in recent period, in order to get legitimacy of resorting to the Security Council, as it was expressed by the speaker, who said that Cairo resorted to the Security Council based on Chapter 7 and also Chapter 6. And I would like to tell him that these conventions and the items that you have talked about, all of them should be implemented when there is a military threat. So if Ethiopia, in a certain matter, would mobilize its military and threaten the peace and security of another country that is member in the United Nations. So when it was realized by the Security Council that this was not the case was referred to the African Union. So the Security Council looks into these matters in a balanced way. So this Security Council is neither siding with Egypt and Sudan nor with Ethiopia. That is why Cairo and Sudan cannot bind the Security Council to classify the building of the Renaissance Dam as a crime. It should not be considered a war crime. So many of the Arab countries have been convinced and persuaded that the building of the dam is an aggression against the rights of Egypt and Sudan. The reason why these negotiations have failed, these reasons might be technical, although so many technical matters have been agreed upon, and this was recognized by all parties. But despite all that, there are some things that have not been approved by Ethiopia, such as drought and expanded drought. Cairo and Sudan ask Ethiopia to bear the responsibilities against these droughts. And Ethiopia says that the loss is joint. And if you would like Ethiopia to bear the burden of these losses, so the basin countries should be present in order to discuss these matters, the matter of sharing the water. There are some other disagreements. Perhaps these might be simple disagreements, such as the methodology of negotiation. So we find that Sudan, in the first round of talks in Kinshasa, has called, instead of talking about the problematics, so Sudan said that the African Union should change the methodology of negotiation, because the change of methodology means that Ethiopia should wait for the other observers to whom it should explain the matter, and it should wait. Mr. Muhammad Al Arousi, some said that the framework agreement of the year 2015 said that the filling should only happen as a result of an agreement. And this agreement talked about the first filling and the second filling, and Ethiopia carried out the first filling and the second filling without agreement with Sudan and Egypt, and it is moving towards the second filling without agreement. Isn't this considered a violation to the declaration of principles? So Ethiopia has not carried out the first filling nor the second filling without any agreement. This was not true. So all these phases, the first phase, and the first filling, and this is something that is known by so many. So the second filling happened, and all these phases have been agreed on, including what had been agreed on by the scientific research team That includes the three parties, and there are things that have been agreed on in the Washington declaration, and it was signed only by Egypt. That is why I can personally say that such a fill-in was agreed upon. I am talking here about the first filling. So please stay with us because Mr. Mohammed Al Mufti is going to stay with us for 5 minutes. So please stay with us. Dr. Al Mufti. So since you are the only legal expert present with us here, so these items talk about these matters. So can or do Egypt and Sudan have the right to resort to international court? Our guest said that these two countries should not resort to the Security Council under Chapter 6 or 7. So talking about failure in the negotiations, so have the negotiations failed technically, legally? If you can comment on that, please. In my view, the negotiations were bound to fail from the beginning. And I have said that in 2011 because Ethiopia has put two conditions in 2011 saying that the building is not going to stop and the negotiations should continue. And this is very strange. I do not think this has happened in any negotiations in the world. Negotiations continue and the building continues. So that means that the negotiations would not have impact the building. So the second thing that was insisted upon by Ethiopia is that the outcomes of the negotiations should not be binding. Yes, it is going to negotiate, but it is not going to be bound by any outcomes of the negotiations. That is why the negotiations were not for technical reasons, but for strategic, clear reasons that have been mentioned. That is why the negotiations have failed. And any negotiations with Ethiopia are going to fail.
We agreed on the first filling, and on Washington we have an agreement. So why Ethiopia refused to sign a binding agreement if they say that the first filling is agreed upon and the second filling is also agreed upon? So why Ethiopia refused? Dr. Ahmed Al Mufti, this situation, is there a similar situation on a conflict about the Renaissance Dam that will have an impact on the water flow to downstreaming countries, Ethiopia and Egypt and Sudan? So this problem, in 1.5 minutes, do you have proposed solution? No, there is no solution because Ethiopia have announced through high officials that this is Ethiopian water and this will become a lake. I have not witnessed a similar situation. I have seen international waters, shared ones. One country have practiced its sovereignty on the river. The African Union also have engaged and Ethiopia have violated the international law. This is Ethiopian stubbornness, and from my point of view, the only solution that is Ethiopia to go back to the table of negotiation. But they need to seize the second filling until an agreement is reached. The international community have to be involved because there will be huge damage on the downstreaming countries. Thank you, Dr. Ahmed Al Mufti, professor in the international law, for being with us from Khartoum. I go to Badr Hassan Al Shafi'i. Dr. Badr, we are still talking about the negotiation that Ahmed Al Mufti have called for and called for the for coming back to the negotiation. Is there are still prospects for the negotiation, or that have become a status quo? I mean, the first filling and the second filling, and this dam have become an Ethiopian reservoir, and Egypt and Sudan have to handle the status quo. As Dr. Ahmed Al-Mufti said, and I have also said that Ethiopia have started the construction before negotiation. That was very bizarre. And even in 1959, before building Sadd al-Ali, have an agreement before starting the construction. But Ethiopia did not follow the same practice. Ethiopia even refused a third party in the negotiation. And the African Union was not engaged, not even in this incident and even in wars. So these negotiations will be effective only in two conditions. First, the presence of the real political will from Ethiopia. The second part is to reach a binding agreement, because as we have said that the agreement of principle, some legal voices says it cannot be used as a legislative tool from international point of view. And also there should be some detailed frameworks. Ethiopia did not do that. That's what Egypt have called for before the first filling last year, and even the second filling this year is to reach a binding agreement. Ethiopia, when an agreement is about to achieved, they withdraw, and even in Washington they have agreed on 90%, but in the last or final minutes, Ethiopia have withdraw. So how, as our friend from Addis Ababa said, Egypt agreed on the filling process, while Ethiopia have refused to join Washington agreement, which specify the different fillings in the flooding seasons. And even Egypt have expressed flexibility. However, Ethiopia insisted on 30 billion. However, we have always all agreed that postponing the filling will not carry much damage. So Egypt and Ethiopia and Sudan were not against building the dam, and even they do not agree on the filling, which is exaggerated. However, there should be a limit of data exchange and also a level of coordination. So if we wanted to talk about negotiations, Ethiopia, if it's willing to get in a negotiation to reach a binding agreement acceptable by all the parties, that Dr. Badr, you have talked about the Ethiopians, but some might ask you questions as an Egyptian, saying that Egypt have agreed and signed the principal agreements, and they have acknowledged the dam. And even Ala al-Zawahiri said there are only disagreement on the drought seasons and the extended drought. So if do you agree on or agree with those who claim that? No. I would like to say two things. One about the agreement of principle, which did not take about the 10 items about the genuine rights of Egypt in the Nile water. It talks about the Renaissance Dam and the filling. So that agreement does not eliminate Egypt's right in the water, which is 55 billion square meters. So Egypt did not waive its quota from the water. So in order to escape from Ethiopian maneuvers, we go back to a TB agreement, which specify the rights. So this agreement, principle did not talk about this. And also, this agreement did not talk about the size of the dam. None of the 10 items talk about the size of the dam. However, Egypt, since the beginning, have said that in order to generate the power, the size of the dam could be 14 billion square meter, and that may be one of the items that have been adjusted, not even without sufficient studies how in a short time you change the capacity of the dam from 14 billion to 74 billion, and even the agreement the Americans center who worked on the capacity of the dam said the capacity should be 14 billion. So Egypt do not want to put obstacles or hinder the dam, but they say that the harms or the damage should be minimal, not huge. Thank you, Dr. Badr. Please remain with us so that we involve our Muhammad Al-Arousi, the Ethiopian political analyst. Mr. Muhammad Al-Arousi, an agreement between the three countries under the auspices of the African Union, they couldn't reach an agreement. So why you in Ethiopia insist to negotiate under the African auspices and reject any other party's involvement? And is there still an feasibility for the negotiation, or maybe this situation now has become a status quo for this Egypt and Sudan? Yes, this Renaissance Dam have become a reality, and a reality that does not contradict with Egypt and Sudan national security. The second thing, the negotiations is not about the construction of the dam as many anticipated or talk. Is not to give legitimacy for the building of the dam. What is required from this agreement of principle is to ensure that Egypt and Sudan do not bear any risks from Renaissance Dam. And here comes the technical details. Your guest said that Egypt will not waive its quota, which is 55 billion square meter. If we wanted, if we want to talk about this quota, which Ethiopia did not take any of that quota, and that's what happened over the last 5 years. Therefore, now the reservoir of Sad Al-Ali have been completed, fully completed. So there is no problem of the filling process. So the quotas of Egypt and Sudan is never too short, is not shortened. So we need to negotiate both downstream and upstream countries about the quotas of the Nile. We cannot agree on what is above and then accuse Ethiopia for imposing the status quo. Who gave that quota to Egypt? Our brothers in Egypt and Sudan, who gave them that quota? Didn't they refuse to be the agreement? Mr. Muhammad Al-Arousi, let me tell you the other point of view. For example, some say that in the history there is something called genuine rights. For example, the region of Bani Shangul that Ethiopia took in 1902, it became an Ethiopian land, although it was in a Sudanese Egyptian lands, and the water that came to Egypt and Sudan, 55 billion, and some say that Tana Lake have also enough water. So these become our genuine rights. Those genuine rights is for those who have the historic right. Ethiopia is the country, upstream country. It's the source country. So Ethiopia, these are not wasted water. This water is Ethiopian water that have been misused due to the weakness of the Ethiopian states over the time. We know that Ethiopia have tried before, but they were hindered. Ethiopia have faced many challenges. And we will say now that all the agreement that Mr. Muhammad Al-Arousi, our time is very limited. Only 2 minutes remained. So me and you will go to the social media and the comments in the social media. Now we read some of the comments of our followers on the social media, on the Facebook and Twitter, and then we give the chance for our guest to respond to the comments. Why Ethiopia? Why Egypt and Sudan ask Ethiopia to sign a Biden agreement? And is there still benefit from negotiation when the dam have become a reality? Now we start with Tariq Muhammad, who tweeted saying that Ethiopia is clear when they say that Nile is theirs and they will invest in the Nile. So what Egypt and Sudan are negotiating for? Muhammad Hassan asked, can Egypt keep their interests like other strong countries around the world, like Turkey and Iran, although these interest varies, or maybe Egypt is a weak country like other Arab country, and they're waiting a dark future. Abdul Tawab Barakat say why Egypt and Sudan rely in signing a Biden agreement with Ethiopia when Ethiopia did not adhere to the principles of agreement in March 2015. There's another one. Why Ethiopia is so stubbornness is that because they receive assurances from other countries. So we take these comments and we give each of our guests 1 minute to comment. Mr. Badr Shafi'i, how do you comment on the participation in the social media? The negotiations, Egypt is keen on those negotiations to reach a binding agreement out of fear that if the second filling will be a legal precedent that Ethiopia will be using, that they are planning to build 3 dams where they hold 133 billion square meter, and then Egypt even will run out of the water in the Sad al-Ali. This is why Egypt is keen to reach a binding agreement. And if Ethiopia did not adhere, Egypt might go into other options, of course, other than the legal option and legal arbitration. This is why Egypt is keen to negotiate in condition that this negotiation end up with a binding agreement, including solving dispute mechanism, and which that agreement will specify the different filling phases in the future. We go to Mr. Muhammad Al-Arousi. How do you comment on our followers on the social media? On 1 minute, if you please. Yes, there are so many points that have been raised by your respectful followers, but to respond on the social media, some say that Ethiopia refused to sign the agreement or to sign a binding agreement. When Ethiopia have refused to sign a binding agreement, and what are the conditions of or terms of this binding agreement? The listener, they need to know the details that Ethiopia refused to sign based on them. We cannot say that Ethiopia refused without knowing why Ethiopia refused. So Ethiopia, as officials have stated, including lastly Dr. Abiy Ahmed in the parliament, talked and said that he is willing to sign a binding agreement. However, there should be some technical and political amendments. Why shouldn't we go back and see why Ethiopia did not sign this agreement? The second thing, this land which the land was built on, claiming that Sudanese land. Of course, these are false information that have been extracted from the social media and the suspicious website that promote those ideas. Those who talk about the borders and the agreement need to know that the Ethiopian land goes beyond that or further than that. If we want to, Mr. Muhammad Al-Arousi, maybe we wanted you to comment on the social media, but we talked about other topics about 1902 agreement and the borders or beyond Ethiopia border. So that's not the time to discuss this. But I would like to thank Muhammad Al-Arousi, the political analyst. Thank you for being with us in this second session of Al Jazeera conference. And we thank also Dr. Badri Hassan Al-Shafi'i, the Egyptian professor. I would like to comment on what Muhammad Al-Arousi said, that Ethiopian water are Ethiopian water, but this river is the international river and it's a cross-border river. This is a message I received from one of the legal experts. By this, we reach the end of the second session, which is organized by Jazeera Studies Center in cooperation with Al Jazeera Mubashir under the title Renaissance Dam Between Political Solution and a Military Confrontation. And also we thank Ahmed Mufti, who was also with us. Before we conclude, tomorrow we will meet you in the third and the fourth sessions about the prospects of a war on the dam, and we will have also analysts and we will talk about the mutual benefits of the Renaissance Dam. Thank you very much for watching, and I would like to thank my colleagues and my guests. We meet with you tomorrow in the third and fourth session. Peace be upon you.